My name's Dave DeBow, founder of MoneyPartnerFormula.com, and this show is built for everyday real estate investors who are actively doing deals and looking to scale using other people's money. So if you're an active real estate investor and you want to get featured on this show to talk about your own real estate and capital raising experiences, then just go to daveinterviewsyou.com. Now let's get rolling with this episode, and remember to subscribe for daily interview content.
All right, guys, welcome back to Property Profits Podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Kaminsky, filling in for Dave Dubow. And have you ever wondered how one person's courage and passion for property transformation transformed their life over the course of 30 years? Today, my guest, Graham Cooper, hailing from Sydney, I think it was, originally from, I think he said North York, Australia, in any case. He's here to share his remarkable journey from an $1,800 land investment to mastering the art of real estate. Graham, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Yes, wonderful to be here, Bruce, and thank you for the invitation. And
Yeah,
I look forward to my 40, 50 years of experience in the property market.
So let's take it right back to the beginning. What got you started and interested in real estate in the first place?
Oh, I think it was basically just my own intuition. My parents weren't owners of property, and coming from England, and fairly poor, and ended up in a big family of 9 children, and I was probably the most uneducated of all the children. My father said, you're not an academic, so at age 14, I was told to get out of school and get a job, which I did. And I guess, that's when the real learning curve comes. That's when you have to, deal with life as it really is, outside all protection of the schooling system and so forth. And so I learned about life, and I had a job at 14 years of age, and I used to have a second job on the side, and I guess that's just something that's inbuilt into me. My siblings didn't do things like that. I have an elder sister who was, reasonably ambitious, but I think I was probably the most ambitious of most of the family. And I think it was in my early 20s that I realised that there was money to be made in real estate. I actually had a background in textiles and fashion, working for Levi Strauss in Australia, actually, as quality controller, and eventually designing jeans for the Australian market for Levi Strauss. But I in that experience, and in my travels during that period, I realised that there was land being bought and sold. And my father said to me one day, "Listen, son, if you ever want to really make any money," and I thought it was strange coming from him because he wasn't really an investor. He said to me, "Look, land, buy land. They're not making any more of it, and so it's obviously going to be a finite resource." And so I think at the age of about 26, I bought my first property, as I mentioned to you earlier in an email, and for about $1,800 west of Sydney, about 30 kilometres west of Sydney, in what was then a developing area. And I noted within about 18 months that the value of that property, or that piece of land, went from $1,800 to just over $3,000. And I thought, wow, this is quite amazing. And I guess that was really the beginning. And then I later met a young lady on a blind date, believe it or not, and she had a block of land as well, and we got together, and we bought a property between us. We bought a property in the middle of Sydney, about 2 kilometres from the centre of Sydney, and it was, in those days, it was a fairly depressed area, semi-industrial, things like that. And we went to look at this house, and it was eerie because I went to see it. It had been dilapidated for 13 years. Or vacant, I should say, for 13 years, and fell into, fairly dilapidated because people had broken in and stolen fireplaces and things like that. Yeah. But when I pulled the corrugated iron off the window and climbed into the house, and the agent was standing behind me, and I walked through the house, it suddenly, I get this feeling that it was the reverse plan or mirror reverse plan of my grandmother's house in England. And it really, really emotionally affected me. And I came out of the property, and the agent said to me, well, come on, we'll go and look at something else. I said, no, I have to buy this. And I walked out onto the main road in front of the house, and I looked back towards the city, and I could see what is known now as Centre Point Tower. So that is the geographical centre of Sydney. And I could see that, and I thought, this is going to be worth a lot of money one day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a 4-bedroom home, 2-story, as I say, what they refer to as a Paddington terrace, which was styled on the English European terraces. It was built by a gentleman with his horse and cart, and built in 1896. And he had been a builder, and he'd been going up to one of the now sort of trendy suburbs in Sydney called Paddington, and he'd been building those, now very renowned terraces, and he'd grown up with a big family. He'd died without a will, and his 8 children had been fighting over the property, and had not come to an agreement to sell it. So I said to the agent, yes, I'll buy it. And it was the princely sum of, in Australian dollars, $26,750. So I went back to the agent's office, and the agent said, well, how much deposit do you have? And I looked at him, and I sort of looked down, and he said, you haven't got a deposit, have you? And I said, well, no, not really, only about $100. He said, don't worry, I'll fix that up. So this is 1976. And he went off and got me a loan from one of the loan shark credit companies. And I paid the deposit, and and away we went. And we spent 3 years renovating that property. And it was interesting that they left the fireplace in the lounge room because it was painted green. And what they didn't know, they'd taken every other fireplace, as the old English terraces had fireplaces in most rooms, because they came from that cold climate, and they'd left the one in the lounge room. And so I went and had a look at it, and scraped some paint off, and it was Italian marble underneath. So thank goodness they didn't, they mistook that, just a timber fireplace. And but anyway, we started renovating it, and we renovated it. Took us about 3 years. We were surprised to find out that alongside the property, at the back, was a double-story, what would you call it, like a double-story garage. And it was actually where the owner, the builder, had stored his horse and cart and all his bricks. And so there was an extra block of land that was attached to this title. So we had 2 blocks of land and a house. So we renovated the house. I went down to the council and said, I want to build something where the old stable was. And they said, yes, as long as you don't increase the footprint. And so I very quickly drew myself a diagram, called in the brickies, and built a 2-room, or actually a 3-room, single-story building on that site. And 3 or 4 days later, the council inspector came by, and he said, where did that come from? And I said, well, I went to see you guys, and you said it's okay. And he said, yes, but you're supposed to submit all the plans. Anyway, he looked at it, because it was double brick. It was well thought out. And what I was doing was turning it into a rehearsal room for musicians, because my background was also as a musician. And it was very successful. I was Sydney's very, very first rehearsal studio for musicians. And so we made lots of money out of that, and that paid for the mortgage and paid for the renovations. And so from then on, we sort of got the bug, and we went and bought a second property. Because we bought that property with private money from a solicitor. Then we started getting, because I had got the deposit, or the agent had got the deposit for me from a credit company, the word had spread and we were getting telegrams saying, would you like to borrow some more money? They knew we had an asset. They knew we were doing it up. The property market was rising and the values were rising. And so we went off and bought a second property out in Sydney's western suburbs, near where I had originally had the block of land. And then about 3 months later, we bought a third property. And we were renting them out. We really didn't understand, the concept of investment. We didn't understand the tax benefits that are available. We weren't that savvy. We were young, 20 plus, and we just followed our nose, basically. I was fortunate that my wife was very, agreeable to most of the things I suggested. And I blindly went into it. And of course, my parents and my siblings said, "Oh, you're going to go broke, and you're going to, all these things are going to happen to you, and it's going to be really bad." And I just ignored them all because none of them had done anything similar. So how could they give me advice? Was my thought.
Yeah.
And I basically just, went on with it and just went with the flow. And we had good tenants, and we actually then in 1980 we bought would you believe, a banana plantation, 10 acres up in Coffs Harbour, which is about 6 hours north of Sydney, the mid north coast, and a more subtropical area. So I bought this 10.5 acres. And the reason I bought that is because my parents had moved up there, and a few of the children had moved, my siblings have moved up there as well. They like the climate. And I thought what I'll do is I think it had 7 or 8 acres of bananas and about 2 or 3 acres of avocados. So I went up, and it was up on the side of a mountain, up high, had 180-degree ocean views. And so I went up there, had a look. There was a sort of platform cut into the side of the mountain for a house to be built on. So I had a house designed with a local architect, and I was going to build a studio onto that as well for rehearsals. And then all hell broke loose with the council. And the council didn't like this young, 30-year-old city slicker coming in. And the banana growers didn't like the fact that, again, I was basically almost at retirement. I was sold the property in Sydney for $100,000, which was just unheard of, in those days, and sold it to another musician who knew that they had the income coming in from the studio and it would pay for the property. And then I got into this almighty battle with the local council up there and the Forestry Commission, who said you can't get access to your property because there's 100 feet of forestry property that you have to cross to get onto your right of way. And I guess this is life. This is where the real test comes, where you either quit or you stand up and fight for your rights. And my nature was I was prepared to confront them. And unfortunately for them, I must have caused them a lot of headaches. I managed to involve one of the local MPs for the area, and he was very happy to score some political points and take it to Parliament in Canberra, in our capital city. And long and short was, basically, we fought with the council and we fought with the Forestry Commission, who were the biggest problem. And we eventually found out that, in fact, the right of way that was there actually belonged to us. It was on our deed. And in fact, the Forestry Commission were at fault because they were using our right of way without permission. And so it came to a point where, there was a stall, and they couldn't win, and we couldn't win. The local utility services said to the Forestry Commission, whether you like it or not, we can bulldoze through all the properties to provide essential services to this client, and you, the Forestry Commission, can do nothing about it because they are essential services.
Mm-hmm.
The Forestry Commission backed down, and in the end, I think there was such a bad taste in my mouth, and the locals were all upset. And I just said to my wife, I think we'll just, for the sake of our sanity, we'll back out of this. We'll sell, which we did, because we can clear our mind and move on to. So get rid of the negatives, move forward, which we did. And we bought another property in Coffs Harbour at that time as well, and a brand new house and land package. And so we lived there. We lived there for about 18 months, 2 years, got rid of the acreage, came back to Sydney because I had a promising information from one of the record companies that they were going to produce some of my music, and came back to Sydney in 1982, bought another property, of course, then bought another property in a well-to-do area, and then we were starting to raise a family. We had children. Then we moved. I said to my wife, well, we can't really live in the city. We should really move to somewhere quieter for our children to grow up. So we moved out to what is known as the Hills area of Sydney, bought a 1 acre site in 1984, I think it was, for $44,000 for 1 acre. When you look back in time, it's just unbelievable that you could actually, what the prices were back in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So we bought this 1 acre and we built a house. I think the house cost us about $60,000. It was a huge Tudor home with 3-car garage. It was in a well-to-do area, so being on 1 acre. And I think about 18 months after we finished building the house and had moved in, someone just came and knocked on our door and said, I'd like to buy your property. And I just looked at this lady and I said, why do you want to buy our property? We haven't even really finished it yet. She said, no, I want to buy. She said, I've been looking for a property for 3 years. And she was an English lady. And she said, and your property is the property that I've seen in my mind for the last 3 years. And she said, when I drove past it, she said, I knew that this property had to be mine. So I said, no, look, we're happy here. We lovely home. And we'd be happy to stay here. And she said, no, you don't understand. I must buy this property from you. And I said, well, look, I'll talk to my wife and we'll see what we can do. But, at this stage, we don't have any plans. So interestingly enough, about a week later, she turned up again and she brought a husband. And the husband was a very well-to-do man. He was second in charge of a very big shopping complex company, Westfield actually, which is a very large company in Australia, build shopping complexes. And he was sort of second in charge in that property, the industry. And he put his hand in his top pocket and pulled out a check for $20,000. He said, here, this is my deposit, and I'll pay you. I think it was $260,000 or something. So it was about $100,000 more than it had cost us. And so I said to my wife, what do you want to do? And she said, well, I don't know what we should do. She said, I want to go and see a friend of mine who is, I thought this was quite funny. She said, this friend of mine is a tarot card reader, and she might be able to tell me what the future is.
Yeah.
So I took my wife along, and she said, so I went to see this lady, and the lady said, well, yes, you're going to sell your house. She said, because you're moving across the gully, because there was a gully behind us. She said, you're moving across the gully to an area that you can see from your backyard. And we said, no. And she said, well, she said, the suburb starts with a K. And I said, no. The suburb way behind us, which we couldn't see, was a suburb called Kellyville. We were in a suburb called Glenhaven. And I said, no, well, we wouldn't move to Kellyville anyway. But she said, no, this is a suburb which starts with a K. It's not Kellyville. And as life, as mysteries emerge, what happened was I met a friend who was part of a government-sponsored, organised land supply called Landcom, and he said to me, "Look, I've got some land not far from you, and we're selling it 800 square meters for about $60,000." And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "What's it look like?" He said, "Well, look, here's the address." So we went and had a look, and yes, it was interesting that it was not far from where we lived, and yes, you could see the area from the back of our property, but the suburb was known as Castle Hill. And I said, well, it doesn't make sense. But anyway, the block was nice. And I said, what do you think? And my wife said, yeah, that's good. And my friend said, look, you can buy the block next door too. And we thought, yeah, maybe we will. Might just hold that one as well. But actually didn't transpire. But we said, what are we going to do with this block? Oh, we better build on it. So we went to see a builder, got a plan organised, started that process. And then we went back to our prospective buyer on the big Tudor home and said, yep, we'll take your offer. So we did that. We moved, and of course we had to, we delayed settlement, so we had to move later into our new property. And this is the wonder of all wonders. The council decided to rename that suburb, and because it was an extension of Castle Hill, it was in the northwest, and it wasn't really central Castle Hill, it was a few kilometres out. And what did they name it? Knightsbridge, starting with a K. How is that possible?
You're just riding the wave of opportunity, it seems.
But how did that lady know that the council was going to change the name? How is that possible? These things really are a mystery to me, how life can be like that. But this lady seemed to know. And then she said to me, you're going to get a job. I said, a different job. And I said, what do you mean I'm going to get a different job? She said, well, she said, you're going to go into real estate, general real estate. Because I actually had been working with a friend who had a display home, and I used to sit in there and just, talk to his customers. Mm-hmm. And she said, you're going to get a job. Actually, she didn't say real estate. She said, you're going to get a job. She said, and every morning you'll go to this big cabinet and you'll open the cabinet and there will be all these sets of keys. And I said, no, I don't know what that is. Anyway, so we'd moved into our new home in Knightsbridge. And then one day, a friend of mine came to visit. He wanted to have a look at the house, and, and he was a real estate agent. And he said to me, you know what? He said, my boss has got an opening for somebody. Why don't you, if you're interested in real estate, why don't you come and have a chat with my boss? We're looking for another salesman. And I said, well, I'm not really a salesman. He said, well, come and have a chat. So I went and had a chat, and he said, let me show you around how we operate. And the first thing he did is he walked up to this big cabinet, opened the door, and there were all the keys. And I thought, another amazing cosmos thing, I don't know. But anyway, he said, I like your style, come and start. So I went there and started. Had never really sold property or anything before. And real estate, particularly when you're in an office with maybe 6 other salespeople, it's a dog-eat-dog business. And and I was a novice, so they were going to set me up, for a bit of fun, teach me the ropes. Anyway, so in comes this fellow, and they pass him to me. So the management and that, decide who gets the prospect, potential property purchaser. So they send this guy to me, and he's an Asian guy, and he's a nice guy. And so I take him out and I show him some of the properties that the company has for sale. And we get to, I think, about the third or fourth property, and he looks at it and he says, this is all right. I said, well, it seems to fit in with what your requirements are, and it's in your price range, it fits within your budget. And so we inspected the property, the owners were there, walked out of the property, walking down the path, and I said to him, well, it's a simple choice. I said, it's either a yes or a no, and you seem to be leaning towards a yes, so do we have a done deal? And I put my hand out to shake his hand, and he looked at me and he hesitated for a minute, and then he put his hand out and he shook my hand, and I said, now this is a handshake, and this is your word and my word, and we're going to agree that you're proceeding with this purchase. And he looked at me again and he said, yes. So I walked back up the path, and the owners were standing at the door as we left, of course, and I said to them, I've sold your property, and this is the price he's agreed to, blah blah blah. And then I went back to the office and I told them that he was going to buy the property, and sat him down and got all his details, and I didn't know back in those days that the properties that the office had to sell were actually listed by different salesmen. And of course, the ideal situation was that if you listed the property and then you sold it, you got a listing commission and a sales commission.
Yeah, sales one, yeah.
I had sold this other gentleman's listing, and he in fact, his name was Malcolm, and he actually was the one that listed it. He's the one that got me the job. Anyway, Malcolm came and sat down at my desk and said to me, listen, we don't do things that way. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you're supposed to come back to the office with the purchaser, and you're supposed to tell me. He said, and then I go and I approach the owners, and I am the one that closes the deal. I said, well, I'm there with the client. He's hot. He's ready to buy. My intuition told me do the deal while he's excited about it. And so I said, that's what I did. And he said, well, look, one thing I have to say, he says, is that, he said, for 3 years, all the people in this immediate area, all the agents, have been dealing with that guy, and no one has ever been able to close that gentleman on a property. And my boss came over and shook my hand and said, well done. You've got a good start. And I think back then, we're talking 1986, I was earning a lot of money. I mean, I was earning $2,000 a month, which, I think the average income would have been about $1,000 a month. So I was earning twice as much as normal individuals, and I just seemed to have the knack of, it wasn't a forced issue with me. Like, I would just talk to people, find out what they want, and try and do my best to deliver what they want. And really, that's as simple as that. I think, a lot of salespeople, they try and use all this psychology and what have you, but the reality is, it's a simple ask the question, find out what the customer wants, and do your very best to deliver on that. And then, you don't have to push, you don't have to, cajole or manipulate people. You just simply let them feel relaxed. I think that they've always felt relaxed with me. And that's been my life story. I mean, basically, I went on from that company to actually, with a few guys from the company, open my own office, and then a second office. So we had two real estate offices. And then we had what we call the Mr. Keating recession, which happened in 1992, when our new Prime Minister, Mr. Paul Keating, who took over from Bob Hawke, decided that the country needed to back off economically, and the market had become, because the property market particularly became overheated in Australia, and in 80 we had I think it was the 88-89 stock market crash. And when the stock market crashes, stock market investors get very nervous and they move into what we call the safe zone, which is bricks and mortar, because it's it's much more stable and less volatile.
Not going anywhere. It can't just evaporate, right?
Yeah. So of course, after the stock market crashed, the property market went through the roof, and we had this massive, boom in 89, 90. And Mr. Keating, got all worried about it, and because he was a new prime minister and he didn't want things to become unaffordable, so he just put the brakes on everything, let the interest rates run up to 18 and 19%. It's just staggering when you think about it. When you think it's like 6% today. And so I said to my colleagues one day, you know what, I'm out of this business. I'm out of the offices. I can't see us making a lot of money, and the market's too slow. They all thought I was crazy, but I said, no, I have to move on, which I did. And that's when I went into basically private. Actually, I did get hired by another company, but basically I just went into the complete property investment sector, not general real estate. And that's where I then had to just help people buy investments. And I went on, I think, from about 94 through to 2006. And I became the $1 billion kid. And I, much to my surprise, and I was headhunted by the major company in Australia to head up their investment division, and I would sell as much, and I would just sit. I because they headhunted me for a couple of years, I didn't want to go, and because I'd given my word to another company I was working with, but eventually I said, if you meet my terms, and my terms were, and we're talking 2003, my terms were 3 half days a week, $1,000 a day plus bonuses. I had to go to North Sydney, and of course parking is an absolute premium. So I said, I need a parking spot. So the boss of the company said, okay, 4 hours a day, 3 days a week, and I'll give you my parking spot. And he did. And I used to just sit in the office there. I had my computer. I'd do a spreadsheet. I would just sit down with the client, go through their finances, go through their budgets, show them how, this has just got to be a great way to, buy a property instead of pay the tax as dead money. Why would you pay tax as dead money when you can use it to buy a property which is going to, have some growth? And so it was just common sense for most people. And, I had people like airline pilots, they brought the top earners to me, and people back in those days earning, 300,000-400,000 a year. And I'm saying you're paying half of that in tax. You could buy 3 properties with that.
It's kind of the same thing that we do in Canada here. We're taxed in a similar fashion, 46% above the halfway median. So you got to put it into rental properties or pay the tax,
Yeah. So, and I think my record was like 8 properties a day in 4 hours, and sometimes 4 properties to one customer. In fact, I had a customer, husband and wife, and 2 sons who were, I think, about 18 to 20 years old. And that one day, one afternoon, I sold them 4 properties, and one for each of them, because they're all working. And actually they were retirement villas, and they had a huge return, above 10%, 10 or 11% net return on the rental. And of course you have capital growth on top of that. I did an incredible deal with, I'm not sure if they'll jump on me for mentioning the names, but in the year 1999, we had a committee for the Olympic Games, which is being held in Australia. And just so happened that the company I was consulting with sent me this group of people, and I took them out to Western Sydney, and I find out what their need was and their budgets were. And I took them to this site, and there were 12 villas to be built. And as is the normal building process, they scraped the ground, and then they work out where the buildings are going to be, and then someone will go around with a fluorescent paint spray, and they'll mark out, basically the slab areas. So they had done that on this site when I got to it, and these about a dozen people turned up in this one group, and it turned out to be SOCOG, which is the Olympic Games Committee. And I was explaining to the group about the area and how it all came about and why this land was being developed and what the future development was. And the lady that was basically at the front of the group looked at me and she said to me, she said, "You know something?" She said, "You're the first person I've ever met that hasn't tried to hoodwink us, hasn't tried to tell us some spin on the story." She said, "And the reason I know that is," she said, "because I grew up just over there." And she pointed to, an area close by. And this was not a well-to-do area. And she said, "I grew up over there in that property, in a with a fairly poor family." And she said, "And I just fought and struggled and pushed my way through life to get where I am today." She said, "I'm so pleased to meet someone like you who knows what they're talking about, knows the economy, knows the area, knows what's driving the economy." So, and all those people bought all those properties, and I sold the whole 12 properties with just fluorescent marks on the ground. And I went to the office and I told them the whole, because it was one development of 12 villas. I said, "Sold." And my boss said, No, it can't be." I said, "Yes, it is." And then when I explained to him what happened and who the people were, because he didn't know, he's just got all these soldiers working for him. So he actually didn't know that there was a committee and what have you. And, that was just an amazing deal, So I had some wonderful, wonderful deals like that. Of late, I think what I try to do is a lot of my buyers, because I make a good connection with them, they can become friends and they can become people who become part of my circle for life. And so even though I've been in the business for 20 or 30 years, a lot of the people I still deal with, and some of those people have bought repeated. I think,
well, when you're in the business that long, people buy and then come to you and sell it because you're still around. They're like, "Oh, is Graham still doing it?" Yeah, we'll sell it with him.
Exactly right. So I have customers who've bought half a dozen properties, and the thrill that I get in seeing them have the courage, first of all, to make that first step. Some of our close friends who have said to us in passing, "Wow, like you're doing all these things, and how could I do that? Is it possible that I could do that?" And I said, "Yes, of course it's possible. This is the process and outline it." So I have a thing here called our feasibility book. So basically, all our customers get one of these, and this is what I sit down with them and I say, "Okay, it's the introduction to the property, why people don't buy, they don't have time, they don't want to do all the research, blah, blah, blah." And then it goes right through the, what their earnings are, what they're paying in tax, I think what frightens people a little bit is retirement. So we talk about, how they're going to set a goal for retirement, and how we can put all that together once they've developed income, what their likely return is, let's say 5% interest on a fixed deposit, and of course then once we do a spreadsheet, there it all is in black and white with a bottom line that says, here is your purchase price, here is in many cases the rent, and all of the depreciation and so forth covers the outgoings. And in Australia we have a system where, but we have a system where you can, when someone is an employee, they can present this form from the tax department to their boss, and they fill in this form, and the boss then puts into their salary a format of deduction, so that they can actually get their depreciation and their tax benefits on a weekly basis. So
instead of at the
they're
end
getting,
or on their tax at the
yeah,
end of the
yeah,
year. Yeah.
extra money goes, instead of paying the tax, it goes straight into their property loan, their investment property loan, and they're reducing the interest rapidly over time. So all these things will really help people to it's just thrilling to see people develop their wealth. And I've seen just ordinary factory workers. I did a lot with the Filipino community, who generally are just they're just
hardworking people. Yeah.
Yeah, and to see them buy a property, see that capital growth, see them leverage that to another property, see their lifestyle change. And that's one of our mottos here, is lifestyle design through property investment. That's the core, and because we practice that ourselves. And that's one of the differences, I think, that give me that edge against lots of salespeople, is that I'm a practicing investor. My wife and I over the 30 odd years, we purchased 16 properties. And our children, who are now grown up, they're in their 40s. They, when we went and traveled overseas, I can remember our first child. We're traveling overseas through Asia, and he's in a bassinet, and so our children have grown up with that. Our children have grown up to be able to do things that their friends couldn't do. We would take school, and we would take them overseas for a holiday, and their teacher would say, please provide them with a textbook and get them to write down their daily activities, in their travels. And so they could come back to school at the end of their holiday, and they could talk to the classroom about, their big adventure. And one of our hobbies was fossicking. So Australia, like many countries, is laden with lots of resources in the form of gemstones and all sorts of things. And I think it's 1908 when we went to Coffs Harbour. Basically, we took a year off, and we went up into northern New South Wales to the opal country. We went to Queensland, to sapphire country, to topaz country, and we did very well, because my attitude was, if you have time, make it productive. Hopefully you're enjoying yourself as well, because that's the secret of everything, of course. Enjoy yourself, but be productive as well. And so during our 18 months in Coffs Harbour, we actually probably spent quite a few months of that time in the gem fields. And, we brought back kilos, literally, of gemstones, which we put into the bank, still there 40, 50 years later. But, that's value, that's money added to. And I bought the machinery to learn how to facet the stones, and made some. I cut a beautiful big topaz for my mother-in-law, who lives in Malaysia. Excuse me. And I took this faceted stone to her back in 1982, I think, or thereabouts, and it was 6 carat, which is a big stone for for a topaz. 6 carat stone. Now the Asians are very, very jewelry conscious, and they love gold. And so she took it to her jeweler to get it set into a stone. And her jeweler said to her, "Where did you find a diamond so big?" And of course, it wasn't a diamond; it was a white topaz. But I had cut a normal brilliant cut has 88 facets, and I cut 120 facets, so it had much more
radiance.
Yeah, radiance and brilliance than a normal stone did. And so my mother-in-law loved me, absolutely loved me for giving me this big stone to wear on.
So what do you I mean, I think the main thing here is that there's a lot more that people need to discover about your story. You're still doing investments today. How do people contact you? How do they get a hold of you if they want to connect with you and find out more about your story, and as well as the way that you help people with investment property solutions?
Yes. Well, actually, currently we're rebuilding our website because I'm sure you're aware with the AI developments, all the software developments, and everything. We decided that we should, really upgrade our website.
Mhm.
Our website was originally built in 2006. It was built by our eldest son, who now works for Meta through their
There you go.
Oculus Vision. Yeah,
Time for an upgrade. So,
yeah.
how do they get a hold of you? What's your email, phone number? What's the easiest way to get a hold of you so that they can continue this conversation?
Yeah, the I try to keep it simple. So our email is Cooper and Cooper. Without making it too long, I just go IPS, which is Investment Property Solutions. So Cooper and Cooper IPS at gmail.com. Or my name, 888@gmail.com. And as I say, our website's actually in construction at the moment. I've been talking to them this morning, but it will be up soon. We have I suppose you would call it a exposure on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on there with the company. I have about 50 videos which I've done. So I've segmented the whole process of property investment in quite detail. And those videos run for anywhere from about 3 minutes to 10, 12 minutes. There's 50 of them. I post them on a fairly regular basis on Instagram, on Twitter, which is now X, and on Facebook and on LinkedIn. So, and on YouTube, of course, we have a YouTube channel, and so we're there. And of course, a lot of our inquiry comes from referrals. So people that we've known, the people that we've helped, and they're very happy to refer us to their friends, their family, and so that keeps us going. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you stopping by, Graham.
Yeah. And I'm, even though I'm now 76 years of age, and I still reckon I've got another good 10 years in me, and
there you go.
And it's help as many people as I can. So I'm very grateful, Bruce, for you to take the time to come and have a chat with me. And I enjoy the process of helping people to enter this amazing area of investment, because it's very exciting, and it's I've said to many people, our economies are cyclic, and you can put a time frame on it. It is truly between 7 and 11 years that you will see a turnaround of our economies. And so really it's not a wild, crazy bet to buy a property. If it's a calculated investment that, given time, will absolutely produce the end result you want. The problem a lot of people have is that they suffer from a couple of things. They're debt averse.
Yep.
They're in fear of the unknown, which is quite normal.
Yep.
Right. And they're not risk takers. They don't quite have the courage. So that's psychologically, that's a lot to overcome. And so what they need to do is sit down with someone like me who can, answer all those questions,
break down those fears. Yeah.
And give them a very clear picture of the reality of what the market is all about.
Awesome. Well, Graham, we're out of the time, but I really appreciate you stopping by.
Yep.
Okay. Until next time, guys, we'll catch you on the next episode.
Give my regards to Dave too. Sorry about the mix. Okay.
No problem.
Thank you.
Hey there, I really hope you enjoyed that episode. And as always, if you want to listen to more daily interview content, make sure you subscribe. And if you're an active real estate investor and you're doing deals and you'd like to get featured on this show, then just head over to daveinterviewsyou.com. Now, at moneypartnerformula.com, we help real estate investors to create a process for predictably getting capital so they can do more deals without relying on hard money lenders or the banks. We do this by building them a private capital marketing system. Now, if you want help turning yourself into a big money capital attraction machine, then book a call with our team to see how we can help. Just visit moneypartnerformula.com to find out more. All right, take care, and we'll see you on the next interview.